Hey everyone, it's Lexie. So in today's video, I'll be sharing with you some of my thriller recommendation books that you probably haven't heard of. So I feel like the fall and winter times are like the perfect time to read thrillers, and so I feel like they just encapsulate like the total feeling and the mood and the atmosphere for some of these thrillers. So these are ones that I think like you guys will really enjoy that I haven't seen a lot of people talk about here on BookTube. So yeah, without further ado, let's get started. So this is one that the first book that this author published was very popular, so I'm sure you're probably familiar with that one, but I'm going to talk about his newest release, which I did enjoy, which is The Maidens by Alex Michaelides. And so this is kind of like a dark academia book where this aunt, who is the legal guardian of her niece, because her parents passed away, she is called by her niece, like, who's basically in tears, saying her friend has been murdered. And so she ends up going to the university to kind of support her niece and all this stuff, but she kind of gets an unease about one of the professors at the university who kind of collects girls, and they're called the Maidens, and she is convinced that he is the one responsible for this girl's death. And so it kind of follows her investigation into that. And I know people had mixed reviews for this one because they didn't think like the plot twist was as believable or as good as what was done in The Silent Patient. But even though I was able to figure out who I thought the killer was and like what actually was going on very early, I still really enjoyed this book. And if you're looking for kind of like a thriller mystery with dark academia interwoven in, then I think this is the perfect book for you. Like, it's like Oxford, it's like total dark academia. So next up, I have Harvest by Tes Gerritsen, and this is a book that I read a long time ago, but it honestly was totally amazing. So it follows a doctor named Abby who is recruited by the cardiac transplant team, and she's really excited about that, but an anguished life and death decision soon jeopardizes her entire career. She and chief resident Vivian boldly direct a crash victim's harvested heart to a dying 17-year-old boy instead of the wealthy 46-year-old woman to whom the hospital has cross-matched it with. The repercussions cause Abby her job and it causes the chief resident her job and leaves Abby shaken. Then a new heart suddenly appears and the woman's transplant is completed, and Abby makes a terrible discovery. The donor records have been falsified. The new heart has not come through the proper channels. Defying the hospital's demand for silence, Abby and Vivian plunge into an investigation that reveals a lethal, unthinkable conspiracy. Every move Abby makes spawns a vicious backlash, and on a ship anchored in the waters of Boston Harbor, a final grisly discovery lies waiting. This one is totally creeping. So if you like medical like dramas, I think you will like this, with like kind of a thriller aspect in here. But I just remember the ending being so intense and suspenseful, and it was just like, oh my goodness, like I flew through this book because I was just hooked right from the beginning, and it is honestly a lot of fun. Tes Gerritsen is a physician, so she is able to kind of incorporate a lot of medical lingo in here, but she does it in a way that is very accessible to a wide audience who isn't necessarily familiar with kind of this medical lingo. But if you like kind of medical dramas and you like thrillers, and I think this is like the perfect mix of kind of those two genres. Next up, I have Pretty Girls by Karin. This is a book that I read, I want to say back in 2019, and this is my first Karin book, and I loved it, and I definitely want to pick up more of her books in the future. But it follows these two sisters that had a falling out when their oldest sister went missing and was never found, and so they kind of end up having to rely on each other when one of the sisters' husband is murdered in front of her, and she's trying to piece together the kind of events that led up to that, but they're also kind of dealing with the repercussions and kind of the fallout that they had that is somehow what they're investigating is somehow connected to the disappearance of their sister, and it kind of goes off from there. But this one, I will say, is very graphic and gory, so just be aware. But I thought it was interesting kind of just seeing the kind of past and present storylines and how you don't really see how they're necessarily connected until the end. And I think the author does a really good job at keeping you interested in these two different storylines, but it doesn't feel like you're reading two disjointed novels. It feels more of like you kind of feel like you're getting tidbits here or there, little clues here or there that are kind of throughout time, like the timeline, which I think is really interesting. And this honestly was so intense. It was a lot of fun, and if you kind of like those like mystery, really intense thrillers, then I think this is a perfect one. And I definitely, like I said, I want to pick up more of her books in the future because I thought they were just like really well done, and so I'm really excited to kind of pick up more in the future. But if you like kind of dark twisted novels, then I think this is for you. Next up, I have Dark Places by Gillian Flynn, and this is actually my favorite Gillian Flynn novel. And so this one I remember just being totally engrossed with. And again, this is another one that is very dark and twisted and kind of a little bit too graphic. So if you kind of are uncomfortable with those things, just be aware. But it follows a girl who, like several years ago, her family was brutally murdered, and she was basically conditioned to say that it was her brother who was the one that murdered her entire family. So she was kind of going about her life. Her brother's in prison until she's approached by this man who doesn't believe her brother was the killer. He believes he is innocent, and so she's kind of like questioning everything that she experienced on that day of the murder. And so we kind of get flashbacks to the events leading up to the ultimate massacre of her family, while she's trying to investigate, like kind of go through her own memory of what was going on, which I thought this one was totally totally great. It was super suspenseful. I was just like totally like that feeling of on edge, like you're like you just know something's going, like you know ultimately what happens to these characters, and so you're just really on edge and you just like feel uncomfortable and like dread, and just kind of having that throughout the whole thing really makes it kind of a very kind of, you have a very visceral response reading this, and it kind of integrates some occult stuff in here. And yeah, it's honestly just a crazy ride, and you just need to like, it's one you just need to go in and experience because it is honestly just a really good like thriller. And lastly, I have Long Bright River by Liz Moore, and this is one that actually took me by surprise. It was actually the first book of the month pick that I ended up picking, and one of the few that I actually enjoyed. But this one honestly blew me away, and I wasn't really expecting too much of it. So it follows two sisters who have a very dysfunctional relationship after their mother passed away from a heroin overdose. So we follow these sisters as they're adults, and one sister is a detective, and she's investigating the string of murders taking place that involve strangulations of women, but they are made to look like an overdose. And so while this is all going on, her sister is a recovering heroin addict, and she hasn't seen her in a while, so she's trying to figure out what is going on. And so you get flashbacks of these sisters growing up with their heroin addict mother, and just what ultimately led to their fallout. But not only is this kind of a thriller and trying to figure out what happened to the sister who's missing and kind of how it ties in with the murders taking place, but it also brings important dialogue into addiction and how that can affect the family members, not only like the person who is the addict, but also the relationships that they have with their friends and family, which I think is really important. And I think she handled that really well. But again, this was one that was super suspenseful. I read this really quickly too because I was just totally engrossed from the beginning, because you get all these different plot lines of like these murders taking place, the missing sister, like there's kind of like a stalker or something going on, but you don't know how these things are connected until the end, which I think makes it a lot of fun because you're kind of like trying to think with the characters of what's actually going on, so you kind of are experiencing it with them, which I think makes it a lot of fun and just a really exciting and immersive read. So if you're looking for something that also has like some important like dialogue in kind of addiction, then I think this is the book for you. So that's it, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below what some of your favorite thriller recommendations are, and if you have some that maybe not a lot of people will know, that will be awesome, because I think like we always get like the same kind of recommendations from a lot of the same booktubers and all those things, so I like to try to mix it up with things that maybe people haven't heard of. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you guys next time. Bye, guys.